Welcome to another broadcast of the Deborah Ruffini Show on the Artist First Radio Network. All past shows are archived. You can find them at artistfirst.com. And now, from England, here she is, your host, Deborah Ruffini.
Greetings from England. This is Deborah Ruffini with another broadcast of the Deborah Ruffini Show. Today it is my absolute pleasure to be speaking with Dr. Jeffrey Long, author and researcher into the phenomenon of near-death experiences and founder of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. Dr. Long, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and it's a real pleasure to be here. We got a lot to talk about.
We sure have. I'm very excited. It's very exciting. The subject is death is something passing on rather, is something we all have to face and come to terms with, isn't it? And it's nice to have. Sorry.
Absolutely. We have a saying here in America: there's only two things certain in life: death and taxes. And so, given that death is an inevitable part of all of our lives, I mean, it's a question that's been asked throughout all of human history. What next? What happens after we die? And that's what's so exciting about near-death experiences.
Yeah.
There's a mountain of evidence from near-death experiences that point to an answer.
This is wonderful. It's so reassuring because I think, I can't speak for every human, but I think it's pretty, well, a vast majority of humans, I think, want to know that we go on, and it is a reassuring thing, and it's nice to know that there has been. Faith is good, but research is even better, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the answers I alluded to in near-death experiences are, as I've written in published papers, perhaps the most profoundly reassuring and positive message for all of humanity that is even theoretically possible. So stay tuned on this discussion today. It's going to be that exciting and that dramatic.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So, Dr. Long, talk us through for the actual process. When the body shuts down, what's the actual process for that? What actually happens when the body shuts down?
Right, well, when the body shuts down, or if you will, dies,
yeah.
A good way to think about that is when the heart stops beating, and that's a common cause of death, obviously, the heart stops. Well, immediately when the heart stops beating, blood stops flowing to the brain.
Right.
10 to 20 seconds after blood stops flowing to the brain, the EEG, or electroencephalogram, which is a measure of brain electrical activity, in 10 to 20 seconds goes absolutely flat. There is no measurable brain cortical electrical activity.
Right.
So it should be impossible to have any remembrance, lucid organized thought at that time, and yet by the hundreds, if not worldwide, thousands of people have reported near-death experiences after cardiac arrest, or if you will, heart attack, under exactly those circumstances.
That's pretty amazing. That is absolutely amazing. The fact that if it was one or two people, you could think, are they just seeking attention? But if it's a heck of a lot more, then, yeah.
Oh, I'm in complete agreement. I mean, there's literally hundreds of documented cases. We know that near-death experience is relatively common. About 10 or 20% of people that nearly die have a near-death experience. So it's obvious that worldwide millions of people have had near-death experiences, and very commonly after a heart attack. So that is certainly amazing, and even more amazing to me as a physician. I sometimes have to just keep reminding myself that these people having these highly lucid, organized near-death experiences are generally, well, they're always unconscious, and often, like following a heart attack, they're clinically dead. No heartbeat, and yet here they are having these experiences. That's almost single-handedly, just from that line of evidence alone, proof positive that near-death experiences cannot possibly be due to physical brain function. There's something else going on.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? It's baffling to understand how this can possibly be argued in light of this evidence.
Yeah, it's such a remarkable observation that, as a physician, I cannot argue against that line of evidence. I mean, that speaks for itself, actually. And the near-death experience, people have them, what we call the near-death experiencers, they know darn good and well that is something beyond medically possible. For example, following a cardiac arrest, heart attack, when the heart stops beating, one of the common first events in a near-death experience is what's called an out-of-body experience.
Okay.
So people's consciousness leaves their physical body, typically going above the body, and from that vantage point, they can see ongoing earthly events, often the frantic efforts of others trying to bring them back to life. So the actual experience is times hundreds, time-stamped to exactly the time that their heart is stopped and when it should be impossible to have a lucid experience. And yet they do.
Wow. That's quite something. And it must be quite exciting to, come back and think, oh, I'm not going to fear it the next time round. That may be a final time round.
And that's a very good point. That's related to what we call the after effects. Those are the very consistently observed changes after a near-death experience. Many researchers have found exactly like you just said there, a dramatically reduced fear of death. Now, that's not a surprise, is it? From their point, they know what lies beyond death's door, an afterlife, and a wonderful afterlife, not only for them, but for all of us.
Yeah.
They also have, of course, well, not surprisingly, an increased belief in an afterlife. As an after effect, they are increasingly compassionate to those around them, less materialistic. These are very common in people that have had a near-death experience.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And there was a challenge set, wasn't there? Was it by the skeptics to prove them wrong, which you had partook in?
Oh, I've debated skeptics for years.
Have you?
They're mainly atheists. Atheists their belief system is such that there cannot possibly be an afterlife, and therefore near-death experiences must be due to the physical brain. I would emphasize I've never lost a debate with skeptics of near-death experience because the evidence is just simply too strong. Actually, one of my favorite debates was with the person at that time that was the president of the American Atheist Association, and there's also a representative of the American Humanist Association.
Yeah.
So we had a good old-fashioned debate, and they lost rather dramatically. So that was fun. But I've debated many other skeptics, and the evidence for the reality of near-death experience and its consistent message of an afterlife is simply far too strong for skeptics or anyone else, for that matter, to refute.
Wow, that's interesting. Did they end up agreeing with you, or were they still sort of fighting and no, this can't be true,
Yeah. Skeptics. It's hard for them. Skeptics that debate me usually are not well informed about the strength of the evidence in near-death experience. And again, they do tend to be atheists, and I've just got to share this. In that debate I just alluded to, the atheists. Atheists tend to be rather unhappy people and not necessarily mirthful. So I started out the debate by telling the radio host, why atheists don't believe in polynomial mathematical expressions? And he said, well, why? Why is that? And I said, because they don't believe in higher powers.
Oh.
So they laughed and laughed and laughed. Of course, polynomial expressions are exponential mathematical expressions. The atheists knew that. They were so disarmed they really couldn't regain their composure during pretty much all of the debate, just because they couldn't take a joke.
Oh, so yeah.
So
yes.
Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. It was funny.
And quite often they can resort to name calling if they don't if there's no comeback, then they'd rather mock and ridicule and be quite immature about it, rather than hold debate. That's very sad.
Yeah, and I've observed that. Oh, thank goodness I'm a physician and a New York Times best-selling author, and I've done this research for 20 years. I mean, good gosh, but they're predisposed to name calling, what are they going to call me?
Not much.
That makes it tough to name call them. But unfortunately, they can name call and ridicule individual people that have had near-death experiences, and that crosses a line into the realm of obnoxious.
Yeah.
I would hope that any near-death experiencer that encounters that, let me know, and I would be glad to debate such an obnoxious skeptic anytime, any place, and in any media, and we'll just let the truth speak for itself.
That would be interesting. We could maybe we could go for that. I'd be intrigued.
Oh, anytime.
Oh, okay.
I love a good debate, especially when I'm right and have a mountain of evidence.
That would be amazing. If we could get Richard Dawkins, that would be interesting, because if we can convince Richard Dawkins, then we're sort of pretty much there. But it's
yes, you do. You do indeed. I understand have a Brit by that name. I would be delighted to debate Richard anytime or any place. I've actually read his book and understand his hypothesis about near-death experience, and would be glad to debate that anytime, any place. You can pass on that suggestion to Richard if you know him.
Do you know, I will. I actually will. Because I'm very...
Yeah.
But it's when we last spoke, I think I put it to you that it's...
Yeah, if you communicate with Richard about that, be sure to tell him I was a runner-up winner in the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies, where my essay on the reality of near-death experience and its message of an afterlife won $50,000, and was very far up. Out of over 1,000 essays submitted, I was in the runner-up group. So it's a serious scholarship, serious original research. So I would hope that would be of interest to Richard or any other serious skeptics who want to take me on and discuss it.
Brilliant. Well, this is even more exciting. I have actually read part of because it's very thorough, and an awful lot of work has gone into that and research. So I'm working my way through, but I have started, and it's just so I find it quite overwhelming. I find it all quite overwhelming.
It really is. I mean, everybody that has had a near-death experience or hears about it for the first time is following my footsteps. When I first heard about this, I was astounded. I said, if near-death experience is for real, when I first heard about it, this changes my view of the universe. I mean, there's something huge going on. That was over 2 decades ago, and I've studied over 3,500 near-death experiences since that time, using the best scientific methods available. And my conclusion after this enormous amount of research is that near-death experiences are, in a word, real.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm far from a biologist, but what the alternative explanation would be, I assume they like emotions, for instance. Do they think it's brain chemicals that are sort of interacting? Or, I mean, what do they actually think is taking place at the point of, during a near-death experience? What do they actually think is taking place in the brain to produce something that clearly is more than the brain?
Yeah. Well, that's not an especially creative skeptical argument, because actually we all know the brain has chemicals and the brain has electricity.
Right.
So to suggest that obviously it's due to brain chemistry and electricity is just to simply attribute a near-death experience to physical brain function. Another significant line of evidence for the reality of near-death experience is that typical near-death experiences occur while under general anesthesia.
Okay.
Now, if you're under general anesthesia, as many of you know that have been under general anesthesia, it's a blank slate. You cannot possibly have any remembrance at that time generally, or especially a lucid, organized experience. But when you're under general anesthesia and your heart stops, and don't forget, heart function is very carefully monitored when general anesthesia is given. When you have those two events, it should be, if you will, doubly impossible to have any lucid, organized experience at that time. And yet, once again, by the hundreds, thousands of people have had near-death experiences when their heart stopped under general anesthesia.
Right.
That line of evidence in and of itself effectively, singly rules out the possibility of near-death experience. And that, may I add, I've researched this, and I have scores of near-death experiences under general anesthesia that I've investigated. They're absolutely typical near-death experiences in every way. That fact single-handedly excludes the possibility that near-death experiences can be due to physical brain function. That's just not possible.
My goodness. Well, it's all clever stuff, and it's and you mentioned that the people that have experienced these have come back to say they're not just dreams; they are as real as you and I talking. We all know the difference between a dream and reality, don't we?
Yeah,
they're very.
The common thing that people that have first heard about near-death experiences, it's very common for them to wonder if they're like dreams, because dreams, for the great majority of us, are about the only type of altered consciousness that we are familiar with in our life. And I know that, so the very first survey version that I ever did over 20 years ago, I asked people that had a near-death experience, quote, "Was your experience dream-like in any way?" Unquote, with a very open-ended question encouraging them to give a narrative response. If it was dream-like, emphasis on in any way. And as a researcher, I was absolutely embarrassed by the responses I got to that.
Right.
Over and over, the responses were, no way, not even close.
Oh.
And sort of like, are you kidding? And so I was embarrassed. I have never, as a researcher, I can't recall such an adamant response as people that had near-death experiences. I remember virtually all of them that have dreams also, adamantly saying it was not dreamlike in any way and expressing that in a variety of creative ways.
Wow. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. And also, dreams are random, aren't they? We wouldn't all dream pretty much the same type of thing. Dreams are often silly. They're not really very orchestrated.
Here's a big difference. Just for those that continue to wonder, dreams tend to be, you're at the very verge of consciousness, so they're, if you will, dreamlike. They are not you're not very conscious at all. You're barely conscious in a dream. Dream content is, of course, hallucinatory and unreal. You see a lot of that, and often the dream content can be, frankly, bizarre.
Yeah.
And what occurs in a dream can often skip around, go from one place to another, and that's common in dreams. None of that happens essentially ever in a near-death experience. A survey question asked, how was about their level of consciousness and alertness compared to their earthly everyday life? And even though they're unconscious or clinically dead, 75% said that during their near-death experience, they had more consciousness and alertness in their earthly everyday life. That is rare in dreams. Events almost never skip around, and in near-death experiences, there's almost never hallucinatory or unreal content.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's and you say that, like, a heightened awareness. So a senses, if someone's visually impaired, that they can see better, have better heightened awareness and senses better in near-death experiences than. Yeah.
Yes, that is a great question. Let's talk about people that are visually impaired that have a near-death experience.
Okay.
Some years ago, I talked with Vicky. Vicky was born totally blind.
Right.
Vicky's vision was unknown and unknowable. You cannot explain vision in terms of the remaining four senses of the physical body. I know I tried, and you can't. So Vicky had no vision in her life. I mean, she even dreamed, of course, in non-visual ways. So when Vicky was in her early 20s, she was involved in a bad car wreck.
Right.
And I've had people ask, gee, was Vicky driving? Well, no, she's blind. What what happened is she's a singer at a professional singer, and she was singing in a bar, and a inebriated, that means drunk, patron was driving her home and unfortunately was involved in a bad car wreck. The first time in Vicky's life that she saw herself, she was having a near-death experience.
Right.
Her consciousness was above her body, and she was initially frightened because vision was so unfamiliar to her.
Yeah.
And then she saw the body down below, and only after she correlated what she prior knew of herself, of her long hair, that she knew only by the sense of feel, and interestingly, a ring that her father gave her, which again she knew only by the sense of feel. She was aware visually that that was her, and that was her father's ring on her finger, and she was over her body. Vicky then went on to have a very detailed and highly visual near-death experience. Now, Vicky, in her near-death experience, described the vision, what is fairly common in near-death experiences, and it's called 360-degree vision. Vicky was simultaneously seeing in front of her, back of her, above her, below her, right and left, all directions, and immediately processing visual awareness in all of those directions. Typically, it's spherical vision is what she had. So when I talked to Vicky, I told her that all of us on our Earth that could see all our life had what's called pie-shaped visual fields, where we can only see a limited amount of area in front of us because of the location of the eyes in our, anatomically, in our head. And Vicky literally laughed at me and said, no, you must be able to see, as I did, in all directions. And Vicky could not understand why you, I, and virtually every person listening to this can only see in front of us and not, as Vicky did, all around her.
My goodness.
Amazing insight into vision in near-death experiences.
Crumbs, that's pretty spectacular, isn't it? I mean, what?
It really is, but there's more. I have now a series of people that were either legally blind or severely visually impaired. It's a direct survey question we ask about their vision during their near-death experience compared to their earthly life. And in every single person who, during their earthly life, had severe visual impairment or was even legally blind, in all of those people, when they had a near-death experience, their vision was at least normal and more often super normal, like Vicky. No visual impairment at all during their near-death experience.
My goodness. That's pretty something. I've just
it's pretty awesome. Again, obviously, that's medically inexplicable to have the blind people seeing during their near-death experience. Again, further dramatic evidence that what's described in near-death experiences is absolutely not the product of physical brain function.
You know, Dr. Long, all the time you're speaking and I'm listening to you, and I'm just, my brain keeps going back to skeptics and the unbelievers and what they would actually class as evidence. I mean, how experiments can't be classed as evidence, and I don't know how you would actually measure.
Right.
How would you measure the non-material through science? I mean, I don't get it.
Getting back to skeptics. Okay, let's just take that and run with skeptics for a bit.
Okay.
Well over 20 different skeptical explanations of near-death experience are floating around. They are every conceivable physiological, psychological, or cultural so-called explanation of near-death experience. Now, the reason that there are over 20 of them floating around is that no one or several of these skeptic explanations make sense, even to the skeptics themselves. I mean, think about it. If the skeptics had one or even several explanations that plausibly explained what's observed in the near-death experience, you wouldn't need over 20 different explanations. The bottom line is, none of those 20 skeptical explanations can explain anything that we're talking about today that's observed in a near-death experience. Skeptics are just simply wrong.
Yeah. So is it stubbornness on their part, or wishful thinking? I mean, I can't personally believe that anyone would wish to be eternal oblivion.
Yeah, really.
But it's
Yeah.
it's unless sorry, no, come on. I was going to say, unless it's if they have to be faced with everlasting life, is it the fear of having to be accountable for a God that they kind of want to push aside and don't want to think about? I don't know.
Yeah, that may well be it. There's very consistent messages in literally thousands of near-death experiences that there really is an afterlife. And I think, again, that's one thing that skeptics, particularly atheist skeptics, have trouble with, even though it is overwhelmingly well described and frequently and consistently described in near-death experiences. If you're an atheist, they assume that this huge body of evidence of awareness of life after death, of everlasting life, must be wrong. Of course, the atheists are wrong, but it just clashes so much with the atheist and skeptic belief system.
Mm. Yeah.
That seems to be the big problem, not that there isn't overwhelmingly strong evidence that near-death experiences and their evidence for an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife, I might add, and for all of us, is real.
But it's interesting, isn't it, how the non-existence of God would automatically result in non-existence of afterlife. I mean, I don't understand why the two should automatically fall hand in hand. Is it because atheism, I'm using the word too many times, automatically assumes a material world and nothing further? I guess that's why it falls hand in hand.
Absolutely. Atheists in general are what's called materialists. And that means that they believe everything that you can see and that we and know and everything we could possibly know is based on, derived from the physical universe. To them, anything outside of that, such as the realm of near-death experiences, an afterlife, some kind of, if you will, immaterial or spiritual aspect in the universe, is by their belief system impossible. Now, of course, they're wrong, but that's how they believe, and that's why they're so adamant that near-death experiences cannot be real. Not because they have any evidence that it can't be real, but because it so severely clashes with their deeply ingrained belief system and materialist worldview.
So they'd much rather believe that the brain is the creator of consciousness rather than the receiver of consciousness.
Absolutely. That's a classic materialist view, is that consciousness cannot be anything beyond what the physical brain produces. And when the physical brain dies, all consciousness of all types from that brain disappears forever. Thank goodness they're so wrong on. Now, may I add, the atheists and materialists will absolutely eventually find out that they're wrong when they die. And they will probably be delighted that they were so wrong when they go on to have an afterlife like everybody else. They'll never be happier about being wrong about anything than that key issue. But they do have life after death. Their consciousness, like everybody else's, will continue, but oops, they'll be dead by the time they know that with a certainty.
Yeah, that's right. And also, it's when we spoke before, you mentioned that the people that have had the experience, that there's been no element of judgment. So even if a staunch atheist does pass on, when they realise they have been wrong, they're not going to be battered for all eternity.
Right. Oh, absolutely. We see that one of the most deeply ingrained, consistently observed things in near-death experiences is a lack of judgment.
Yeah.
And especially a lack of judgment of an entire being, or actually it's a soul that exists when their consciousness is apart from the body, is a good conceptualization. But during what we call life reviews, during other aspects our earthly life is fully aware of how fallible our earthly beliefs are, and how in their overwhelming, thank goodness, loving and compassion for each and every one of us on earth, it seems to be more important that we're loved than judged. Now, that's not to say in the afterlife, on fairly uncommon occasions, the God or other spiritual beings may be angry about and upset about how the earthly life has been lived.
Yeah.
And that would be, I remember a few near-death experiences where they had illicit drugs, they lived their life very anti-socially, so they may encounter beings that are unhappy, emotionally unhappy about that aspects of their life. But what overrides all is the overwhelming love. And as one near-death experiencer said, you're loved completely for who you are, all that you are, everything you are, through and through. And that is the extremely good news about the afterlife.
Yes, isn't it? Because we all screw up in life in one way or another. And
No, yes.
Yeah.
There's yes. I have yet to meet a perfect person, and I'm certainly not either.
Yeah,
we've done some things we're not proud of, is a common line I hear. And the good news is that this isn't even a matter of forgiveness. We're just simply not judged. If there's any judging that's to be done in the afterlife, it is each of us as individuals passing judgment on our own individual earthly lives.
Yeah.
But again, in that realm of overwhelming love, compassion, and greatly accelerated consciousness and awareness of the full story about how and why we made mistakes in our earthly life, we are beyond forgiven. We are simply beloved and a part of that consciousness in the life beyond.
That's beautiful. And, the beauty of your findings, Dr. Long, is that people who have had the experience haven't been strictly belonging to one fixed abode with their spiritual belief. And it's because I think sometimes we can...
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
One near death, just to take that important concept you said there and go with it, one near-death experiencer was, somewhat surprised about there being a lack of judgment in the afterlife about what people's religious beliefs around the world were. And they concluded, after their very detailed near-death experience, that God is much more interested in our love life than our religious life on earth.
Oh.
How did we express love? And you can do that anyway in any religion. There seems to be respect for all spiritual paths on the other side. And that is certainly heartening for everybody wherever on the planet they live and whatever their spiritual path might be.
Absolutely. And all loving, unconditionally loving God wouldn't wouldn't pick sort of like a select few, would he?
Let's talk about God and religions for just a second.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most illustrative near-death experience that got into that issue was there was a near-death experiencer in the presence of God. And the near-death experiencer asked God very directly, what about different religious beliefs around the world?
Right.
And in the answer, God showed this near-death experiencer a mountain. On the mountain, there were different people climbing toward the top of the mountain. They were not aware of each other because they were around climbing up different sides of the mountain.
Yeah.
And God's point was, this is all the religions. They all have their separate journey. They're all doing it sort of their own path, and yet the destination at the top of the mountain is all the same.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
God is when God is encountered in near-death experiences, that's a illustrative example. God is extremely wise, as you would imagine.
Mm. And we're not going to... It's a big expectancy of him to... for us to get it right this side of life and to, crack the code and gain the ultimate truth, whatever the ultimate truth is, It's
Yeah, well, we're all on a path to the ultimate truth. We are all. There's one thing that researcher, is it's vastly humbling to realize how limited our intellect is in our earthly life compared to the vastly greater intellect in consciousness in the afterlife, and especially God. I mean, we're literally the intellectual relation of God to those of us living our earthly life is somewhat analogous to those of us living our earthly life in comparison to ants climbing the wall and their intellect.
Yeah.
I mean, the gap is that extreme. So that's you have to be. It doesn't diminish us in any way, but I'm just saying the afterlife, the consciousness, and especially God, is radically beyond probably what any of us could possibly conceive in our earthly life. It's so great.
Yeah. And it makes it exciting. I get quite excited by that because, you know, I don't want to run down any denomination, but I found the more now I'm going to use a word. Personally, I found the more Pentecostal the church I've been in, the more there's this pressure of fear of if you haven't got it right. And it's nice to know that it takes that weight off to hear the things that you're saying.
Yep. Well, I've seen the same thing. I've actually given my near-death experience talks in a number of different churches.
Okay.
And it breaks my heart when I'm there and I'm going to talk about the overwhelming importance of love in the afterlife, and I hear what I am reluctant to sound judgmental on this, but I think both of us have seen exactly the same. Fear-based preaching. In other words, you have to do things exactly right by our religion, or you risk going to hell forever.
Yeah.
That's simply not loving, and it's simply not true. And it's sad when I hear that or believe that people that are of different religions down to earth are obviously fated to an eternal, horrible existence because they did not believe in this particular religion.
Yeah.
Every shred of evidence in the near-death experience converges on the fact that concept is wrong. It's unloving, and I hope as humanity evolves, changes in their religious beliefs and religious understandings, that there's going to be more embrace of the importance of love in religion and less embracing negatively judgmental, unloving concepts like you and I have noticed in some churches.
Oh, amen to that. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's just crossed my mind, Dr. Long. Have there been cases where people of other faiths have been met by Christ and their personal belief has not been... We're not talking about atheists now, but people of other faith, like sort of Muslims, Hindus, have actually had a Christ encounter?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've researched in my most recent series, over 60 non-Western near-death experiences. These are non-Judeo-Christian near-death experiences. So it's striking to me that Christians, or those of the Judeo-Christian country background, are much more likely to encounter Jesus. Maybe it's about around 7% of near-death experiences, so it's not hugely common, but it's not rare either. But that seems to be fairly, you see that a lot. Now, I did a research on over 20 non-Western Iranian Muslim near-death experiences with a near-death experience researcher in Iran.
Oh.
And we wrote a couple papers together, and while we agreed that these non-Western near-death experiences were strikingly similar to typical Western near-death experiences, it was very uncommon that, in fact, they did not at any point encounter Muhammad. So I asked him about that, and the Iranian researcher said that in the Islam faith, it would be very frowned upon for anybody to state that they encountered Muhammad. And so that may explain why people are reluctant to state that they encountered Muhammad, or if the near-death experience encountering religious beings, even in my fairly extensive data set, it's there, but it is very, very uncommon and occurs so uncommonly that I'm somewhat reluctant to make any sweeping conclusions about it. For example, Buddhists almost never, or maybe never, encounter Buddha.
Okay.
Hindus, they very uncommonly encounter Hindu gods, but it's very uncommon.
Right.
And then, of course, Muslims, not surprisingly, may be reluctant to say that they ever encountered Muhammad. But my gosh, Christians aren't the least bit shy about saying sharing when they encounter Jesus in their near-death experience. And I think it's probably that probably is related more to well, it's probably multifactorial. But certainly the good news is Jesus is not uncommon at all in typical Western near-death experiences.
Okay. Oh wow, that's yeah. No, I was wondering about that because it's yeah, I was being very curious about that. It's an interesting because I mean, I personally believe.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I might add, when Jesus does appear in near-death experiences, and I'm actually actively studying this and have over 100 examples.
Yeah.
It's different from what you might think. Jesus, interestingly, does not appear in near-death experiences and advocate that they should become Christians.
Okay.
Remarkably, like God in near-death experiences, maybe that's not a surprise, Jesus is also seemingly very respectful of whatever spiritual path people go. And interestingly, does not tell, you almost never hear Jesus giving commands about specific things to do in their earthly life.
Okay.
You essentially never hear Jesus suggesting that he ought to be praised or worshipped, for example. The main thing, by far, that Jesus is in near-death experiences is, like God, an overwhelmingly loving presence, one who listens a lot, one who is simply there and, may help the near-death experiencer at the end of the experience to either return to their earthly body one way or another. That's a fairly common role. And certainly Jesus is, as all other beings in near-death experiences, extremely non-judgmental.
Oh, that's even better. That's nice to know. That is nice to know.
Oh, yeah. As a Christian, I find, and I admit that I am, but I find that extremely reassuring. So, yay, how's that for good news for all of us that have done things we're not proud of? Oh, people, I mean, gosh, obviously that's one of the most dramatic things that people encounter in near-death experience, and that's, over and over, Jesus is an overwhelmingly positive part of their near-death experience, extremely positive, almost uniformly, just for those very reasons, being that overwhelming, loving, compassionate being that loves them just like God for all they are, who they are, everything they are, through and through, completely, and non-judgmentally.
That's beautiful. Do I thank God for allowing people to have these encounters, and I wonder if the reason is for for him to sort of reveal himself and to give us hope of something that we never thought possible, or or telling us to not be afraid.
And I might add, most people believe that obviously Jesus would only appear to people that have a strong Christian faith, and that's not true at all.
Yeah.
It seems to be much more random than that. One of my favorite Jesus encounters in a near-death experience is when there was a person who was an atheist.
Right.
A confirmed atheist had a near-death experience and met Jesus Jesus was in a business suit.
Right.
And the atheist immediately knew this was Jesus and recognized Jesus as such and asked, why are you in a business suit? And Jesus laughingly answered, well, gosh, you would not have believed me if I appeared in robes with you. And they both thought it was funny, and they both laughed and had a good old time. And they went on to have a lot of very positive interaction. The atheist was not judged. However, I would emphasize that atheist is no longer an atheist.
I bet. Yes.
I I hate to say obviously, but I'll say it obviously. After an experience like that, one cannot be an atheist. So that person is not an atheist. And actually, that takes a lot of courage too. Very often atheists are sort of recognized or known by lots of people around them, and that's their identity, is being an atheist. So when they change, even when they change away from an atheist, that's actually not that easy. Even after, it changes how people know them, how they relate to a lot of other people. Change, even positive change, can be difficult. So my hat's off to all atheists that have near-death experience and then stop being atheists, as they almost uniformly do, because that can be a real substantial change in their life, even if it's a change for the better.
Yeah, that's true, because there must be that, I don't know about fear, but sort of apprehension about their fellow atheist friends thinking they've off the rocker, barking mad. But then I suppose once you've had an experience like that, you wouldn't really care what your atheist friends thought.
That helps. It helps to have them deep down at every fiber of their being, and I dare say soul.
Yeah.
That atheists understand that. They understand they do have a soul, and then they give up being an atheist. You're right, because that's. They may have related to other atheists. They may be part of atheist groups. And it's tough to just say, wow, I was wrong for so long. There is God, there is an afterlife, and that's true for me, you, and everyone, and walk away from their atheist beliefs. It's not at all that simple or easy for a lot of them.
No, I bet it is. Can I just ask you, Dr. Long, so people that have encountered near-death experiences, that when they've seen loved ones, have those loved ones always been people that are deceased?
Could you say that again?
Oh, sorry. People that have encountered near-death experience, if they've seen loved ones, have the loved ones always been people that have gone before, or have they ever seen people that are still with us?
You mean they encounter deceased loved ones?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, we see that maybe 15-20% of the time in near-death experience, probably closer to 20%.
Okay.
During the near-death experience, especially when they're in these unearthly, or if you will, heavenly realms, they may encounter people that they knew in their earthly life that died. And even if that person they knew died of very advanced age or disfiguring illness or accident, they're essentially always picture-perfect health in the near-death experience. And may I add, even deceased beloved pets appear in near-death experiences. I mean, you name it, dogs, cats, horses, birds, I've heard it all. And that, once again, like deceased people, joyous reunions and the deceased pet in picture-perfect health.
Yeah.
Now, that's actually a line of evidence for the reality of near-death experience, because if you encounter in an unearthly or heavenly realm anybody that you knew in your earthly life, 96% of the time they will be deceased at the time of the near-death experience.
Oh, okay.
And it's rare, relatively rare, only 4% of the time beings encountered in these unearthly or heavenly realms are alive at the time of the near-death experience. And that's, of course, completely different from all other forms of human consciousness that are altered in your earthly everyday life, dreams, hallucinations, you name it.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of people you encounter will be alive at the forefront of your consciousness when you have a dream or hallucination. But near-death experiences, that's another line of evidence for their reality, is that these people are deceased. And even, amazingly, we've even had near-death experiencers described encountering deceased siblings, brothers, sisters, that died that they did not know existed. These are typically people that had their near-death experience in early to mid-childhood. They may have had a brother or sister that died when they were extremely young or even before they were born. And it's not unusual for grieving parents to not want to tell their child they had a brother or sister that died until they're old enough to have a better understanding of death, say around 12 years old.
Wow.
So I have a small series of people that encountered deceased brothers and sisters they never knew and existed, and when they tell their shocked parents after they recover from their near-death experience, in my series, every single time, if it was a boy or a girl they encountered, the gender was correct.
Oh, wow. Crumbs. Yeah, it's not just one or two things that may look as if, is it? It's a pretty hefty load of evidence there.
There is a huge amount of evidence.
Yeah.
So for those skeptics or people that don't believe that near-death experiences are real, I immediately add that in the most recent survey I did, I asked people that had a near-death experience directly, what do you currently believe about the reality of your experience? 93.8% answered the experience was definitely real.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's staggering.
if skeptics want to argue that near-death experiences are not real, out of respect for people's general ability to know reality, if skeptics really want to say that it's not real, they should really be the ones to provide strong evidence that near-death experiences aren't real.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed, they have no evidence whatsoever that explains what's in a near-death experience, not anything we're discussing today, let alone the totality of evidence we've discussed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, we'll do a challenge in the near future, Dr. Long. We'll get someone to. I'm interested in what the comeback could be, really.
I've actually thought about that. I've had spent a vast amount of time looking at near-death experiences from every skeptic argument I can conceive of. I've talked about it with my wife, who's interestingly an attorney.
Okay.
And, attorneys like to argue or debate, and neither of us can come up with any. We have nothing to debate. We both read all the experiences, and we are absolutely convinced that based on huge amount of evidence that they're real. So,
Yeah.
it would be, it's just, neither of us, in fact, I even asked Jody, I said, look, you're an attorney, how would you argue against near-death experiences reality?
Oh.
And Jody was not amused.
Oh, really?
Quickly pointed out that she would have to only argue rhetorically, and that she would be unable to argue based on anything factual to argue against the reality of near-death experiences.
Oh,
so
wow.
I asked her that once and won't ask her again.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we're done. So anyway, and you're right. I mean, the key thing is it's not just one or several lines of evidence for the reality of near-death experience. It's many, many, many lines, all individually extremely strong, but considered collectively, I consider proof positive for the reality of near-death experience and an afterlife.
Excellent. Oh, that's a great note to end on, Dr. Long, and it's I'm on quite a high now because it's especially with what's going on, it's good to hold on to knowing that we don't fizzle out and become worm meat at the end of the day. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I really appreciate your insight and the work you do, which in turn is such a blessing to many, as you've been to myself.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciated the opportunity of being here. Great questions, great line of discussion.
Yes, exciting.
I absolutely believe what we've shared here today is going to be both informative and inspirational to a vast number of people.
Yes, I do as well. Yeah, I'm very hopeful that there's going to be lots of people intrigued and helping many that are thinking about this sort of thing and worried about the end of their days. And it's all encouraging stuff, which is that's the aim, isn't it? And we'll feature the link to the NDERF website, if that's okay, on the homepage.
That's correct. If you want the largest publicly accessible collection of near-death experiences in the world is the NDERF website, and that's nderf.org.
Okay, lovely. We'll have that on the site. That's right. Thank you so much again, Dr. Long. Really appreciate this, and thank you for tuning in. The audience at home. Until next time, lots of love and God bless.